Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's me, Josh, with American Gnome Productions. I hope it, excuse me. Hope everybody is doing okay, and everything is okay today for you guys. Hope you're happy, healthy, and safe. Um, I've got several things to do today. I've got to run some errands before I go into work, and then I work today. But while I have some free time and some downtime, I have some videos that I have um, come across between the last time we talked and now. I have plenty more, but these are ones that I feel like I can at least squeeze in while I have some time. Let's get the TV room going. Yeah, oh, that fits nicely with it. Yeah. So somebody told me that it would be nicer if I was more close to you guys so you could actually see what the heck I'm saying and doing. So, um, yeah. Hi. So let's jump into it then, shall we? Um, you know what? Let's start out with something less traumatic than normal. I did that not. Oh, there we go. All right, all right, all right, all right. So, um,
In the 1990s, there were few other directors working in Hollywood as famous as Steven Spielberg, from creating the first true Hollywood blockbuster with Jaws, to capturing the hearts of audiences with E.T., as well as helming the iconic Indiana Jones franchise. Almost everything he touched turned into box office gold. So when it was announced that he was taking on the beloved story of Peter Pan, filled with an all-star cast and a massive budget, it seemed like a classic in the making. But sometimes not everything goes according to plan, and this is the history of Steven Spielberg's Hook.
Hook, 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 hook. I don't know if I like you guys being this
The
close to
story
me.
begins in the 1950s when a very young Steven Spielberg directed a theater production at his elementary school, a shortened version of Peter and Wendy, or Peter Pan and Wendy, by J.M. Barrie. This was one of Spielberg's favorite books as a child, and was often read to him by his mother as a bedtime story. In fact, unlike most kids in the early 50s, his first time seeing someone fly wasn't on the Adventures of Superman television series. It wasn't even within a kids show. It was Disney's animated film Peter Pan, and unbeknownst to him at the time, the act of flying would have a major influence on his future. In many ways, Spielberg saw himself as Peter Pan, a boy who never wanted to grow up and who never wanted to lose his imagination and who was obsessed with make-believe. So once he chose to pursue a career as a filmmaker, the decision came as a surprise to no one who knew him as a child.
Steven Spielberg is making movies and a fortune while he's still growing up. He's really just a big kid. Is that how you see yourself? Is that a reasonable comment?
I think it's reasonable to understand a big kid.
By the 1990s, Spielberg had proved himself as one of the most...
I think in a lot of cases, to be a filmmaker, you must maintain some kind of connection with your inner child or your inner dreamer.
Movies focused on adventure, places beyond the stars, and of course flying. But then came the incredibly controversial prequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Scared and thrilled all of us.
The problem
It was low-key traumatic, but we loved it anyway.
Although the reaction was far less enthusiastic than Raiders, it was the incredibly dark tone and graphic violence within the PG-rated film. The backlash was so severe.
Gremlins,
This,
such a good
alongside
movie.
the also controversial PG-rated film Gremlins is what led to the creation of the PG-13 rating. The suggestion for the new rating was actually from Steven Spielberg himself, and the controversy would have a lasting impact on his approach to violence in future films. But for his next movie, he would take on one of the biggest criticisms of Temple of Doom, that he'd abandoned the innocence of his earlier movies. He would do this by adapting his favorite childhood book, Peter Pan and Wendy.
Gasoline. Gasoline.
The initial intention stayed very faithful to the original source material, with the 1924 silent film adaptation also providing much of the inspiration, although it more than likely would have featured a much more realistic crocodile. It was also written as a musical, with the king of pop Michael Jackson to play the iconic role of Peter Pan. At least that was the rumor that refused to die. It's clear that he desperately wanted the part and was practically begging Steven Spielberg, but while countless publications said he was signed on to the film, Spielberg consistently denied he was ever even a consideration.
If I only had a brain, I would have figured that out a long time ago.
However, for the villainous Captain Hook, the award-winning Dustin Hoffman was signed on to the film and took the role because he'd always wanted to make a movie for his kids. By late 1984, pre-production on Steven Spielberg's Peter Pan was going full speed ahead, with filming set to begin the next year.
Would you say there's a sense in which E.T. is some sort of plea for a permanent childhood? Part of it is me, calling out, saying to myself, I'm 34 years old, I'm not married, I don't have kids. Is this going to be my last summer vacation before I have to be a responsible adult?
Just a few months before filming began in London, a life-changing event happened to Steven Spielberg that took him off the project, the birth of his son, Max. In his own words, he just couldn't be Peter Pan anymore, because the responsibilities of becoming a father completely changed his view on life. He was no longer interested in telling that particular story. So Spielberg abandoned the project, and for several years, focused on directing films with much more serious topics, such as The Color Purple and Empire of the Sun, which dealt with the end of childhood, quite literally the opposite of Peter Pan. Meanwhile, again related to Spielberg's version, screenwriter James V. Hart was working on his own adaptation. He'd actually been trying to bring the story to life since the early 80s, but could never quite figure out how to do an updated retelling.
Oh, please believe. If you believe, wherever you are, clap your hands, and she'll hear you. Clap! Clap! Don't let me die! Clap!
However, in 1986, his family was having dinner.
I've just got to say, most depictions of Peter Pan are fucking creepy. Let's just come out and say it. Because if you really, really think hard about the legend of Peter Pan, he doesn't want to grow up. He kidnaps other children to keep him company. And he hopes against hope that they won't grow up, but they usually do anyway. And unfortunately, the one of the conclusions you can draw is that Hook was a former lost boy who grew up, and pirates are former lost boys that grow up. Kind of leaves you with a real dark projection of where the story goes along those lines. Mm-hmm.
One night, when a 7-year-old son
He kidnaps kids.
asked him a question, did Peter Pan ever grow up? And when told no, he replied, well, what if he did? This led him to completely rewrite the script, becoming Hook, the Return of the Captain, a story of a new version of Peter Pan who flew away from Neverland, had a family, completely forgot about his past, and became a workaholic lawyer. But once his kids are stolen by Captain Hook, he must return to Neverland and rescue his children, and begins a journey to rediscover his past. Now it gets really messy. As
The
far as
Kid
who had the rights
Stealer.
to what and when, and which studios and agents were involved at different points in time. But suffice it to say, this version of Peter Pan eventually wound up at TriStar Pictures. Hired to direct the feature was filmmaker Nick Castle, who had just come off of the success of The Last Starfighter. For the role of Captain Hook, Dustin Hoffman was once again signed on to play the iconic villain. For the role of Peter Pan, rumors began circulating once again about Michael Jackson's involvement, though once again this was quickly denied. However, the script was sent to actor Robin Williams, who is mostly known for his charismatic energy and comedic brilliance. But in recent years, he'd proven himself as a talented dramatic actor in films such as Dead Poets Society and Awakenings. This made him the perfect choice to play the role of Peter Banning, who goes through the emotional arc of a miserable adult to the childlike and mischievous Peter Pan.
Did you have any reservations in taking it? I mean, is this right for me?
I had many
Really?
reservations.
Look at those colors.
I mean, because I'm the one who did Popeye, and I'm going through that whole experience. And not that that was a bad movie. There's wonderful things about that. It just was a movie that didn't end with all the pizzazz that it should have.
But he was also very hesitant to doing another fanciful, big-budget adaptation of an iconic character, as the critical and box office failure of Popeye was still very fresh in the public's eye. However, he ultimately
I liked
decided to take
Popeye. I
a
don't
risk
understand why it
and
got
actually
such bad
signed on to
reviews.
play the iconic character of Peter Pan.
I don't know if it's still there, but like that whole village, the Popeye village, the original village was actually built. So I think it's like I think there's a documentary on Popeye, or it might have been Robin Williams, or it might have been about, I don't know, I think it was about the Popeye movie, or something. But I heard or read that the village is still intact there because it was so nice. So yeah, there's that.
He's got to make a jump to the eyes. I really hope it works. And he goes, "Fine."
Hello, new viewer. Nice to see you.
Fast forward to
Settle in.
filming Wrath on Indiana Jones.
It's about Hook right now.
Which made in part to make up for Again, it's a little messy, so to keep it simple, the screenplay for Hook: The Return of the Captain was sent to Steven Spielberg by his former agent, who just so happened to run TriStar Pictures. Spielberg immediately fell in love with this new take on the classic story.
Hope you're
of
doing
Peter Pan.
you're happy and
There was
healthy
just
and
one
safe.
problem. Hook already
Productive
had a
today.
director. So in a bit of a controversial move, Spielberg wound up replacing director Nick Castle, who was given a six-figure settlement and story credit. But in his defense, supposedly it was the studio's decision to take him off the film, not Spielberg's, due to creative differences with the actors.
Does he look up again?
He looks up a second time.
But that, the call has to be there.
Oh, yeah, I think you're right.
Let's
Absolutely.
get that.
At this point, the idea of making Hook into a musical was still very much part of the plan, and was initially envisioned as an epic 3-hour presentation in the same vein as Dr. Dolittle. So composer John Williams and lyricist Leslie Bricusse developed at least 7 original songs for musical numbers. However, this approach was ultimately abandoned, and only 2 songs would make it into the film as initially envisioned, although many would find their way into John Williams' instrumental score. The original screenplay by James V. Hart also went through quite a few revisions, such as fleshing out the character of Captain Hook. Another was Tinkerbell, in which the one and only Carrie Fisher was brought in to rewrite much of her comedic dialogue.
It's just Dumbo.
I know who it is.
I got him on loan from Disney.
Casting for this new version also saw the likes of Bob Hoskins as Smee, Julia Roberts as Tinkerbell, and Leonardo DiCaprio as Peter's son Jack. Well, almost. Prior to gaining notoriety on the comedy sitcom Growing Pains, the up-and-coming actor actually auditioned for the role, but lost out to
Heard a
Charlie
cat and I couldn't
Florsheau.
see one. It's
Another actor who
Mr.
didn't get the
Quattro.
part was Joseph
Literally,
Mazzello,
literally
who was
absorbs all the
responsible
light
for
around him.
But since Spielberg was very impressed with the actor's audition, he promised him a role in another film that was in pre-production.
I feel real responsible to the people who take chances on movies. So when somebody gives me more money than I've ever had to make a movie before, this is the most expensive I've ever had my hands on. That's what got me nervous.
I'll be out in a minute, Mr. Quattro.
By July of 1990, pre-production was once again well underway on Steven Spielberg's Peter Pan adaptation, which was now simply titled Hook. However, even before shooting began, there was a lot riding on Hook's success, especially at a time when Hollywood was beginning to rethink its stance on high-cost blank-check productions. In fact, many studios had actually agreed to lower spending
Yeah, there's
after
that
a series
Kubrick
of
stare.
underperforming big-budget, star-filled blockbusters. The primary reason for Hook's massive budget were the incredibly lavish and intricate sets at Sony Pictures Studios. The biggest soundstage was home to the Jolly Roger set, which was one of the largest movie ships ever constructed in Hollywood history. There was also Pirate Town, which was built to house the over 300 extras playing Captain Hook's crew. The Lost Boys
Look at that.
Neverland
Oh my
Playground
God,
was
such-
another gigantic movie set, which featured the equally massive
How
Neverland
about give me a
Tree,
Really?
The sets were so impressive and larger than life that many of Hollywood's biggest stars went out of their way to gain special passes for a screen.
Yeah, people like it actually happened quite a lot, from what I gather. But like there were a number of times where like the movies were so cool or the sets were so grand that people would, or stars in Hollywood, or anybody that can get out there would try to get on set. And I can only imagine that this is one of those things like all the shit the kids get to slide down on and go through in the movie with the Lost Boys set. I mean, come on, that shit is awesome. The luge, yeah.
But aside from the unprecedented scale of these sets, they also had a connection to a beloved...
One second, let me go let my cat out real quick. It's hot as hell outside.
It wasn't strange. It didn't feel like a set. It felt like, it sounds like a cliche like home, but it felt very, very comfortable. And I had a great feeling walking in there. Number one, because it's also the place where they shot The Wizard of Oz.
The pirate ship was built smack dab in the center of Emerald City.
Filming began in February of 1991, and perhaps it was due to The Wizard of Oz having used the same sound stages 6 decades earlier, but many were predicting that Hook could be the Wizard of Oz of a new generation. And who could blame them? On paper, everything about the production of Hook did seem like a classic in the making. You have Hollywood's biggest director, award-winning actors, a literary classic material, and at the time, one of the most expensive movies ever produced.
Everything fits.
Feels real good!
Are you frightened of the impending uplift, Swiss Bandit?
Not at all. It's that type of tension that makes acting so much fun.
However, while it seems like there were nothing but smiles on the production of Hook, there was one incident that soon found its way into the media tabloids involving Julia Roberts. Allegedly, she was known by the cast and crew as Tinkerhell, but this was more than likely a reference to a very particular incident, as opposed to the myth that she was some kind of tyrant on set. It's a bit of a long story, so I'll just summarize. Julia Roberts was engaged and set to marry actor Kiefer Sutherland, but then there were allegations of him cheating on her with a stripper, her cheating on him with his best friend, and the wedding was ultimately called off. This led to Julia Roberts being whisked away to Ireland by said friend, right in the middle of filming Hook. The situation got so bad that Spielberg allegedly threatened to fire her from the movie, with actresses Meg Ryan and Michelle Pfeiffer listed as possible replacements for reshoots. However, eventually Spielberg and Roberts were able to work things out, and she returned to finish the film.
It was an unfortunate time for us to work together, but I think that Julie is a really, really good actress.
Would you have any hesitation about working with her again?
This is a 60 minutes question, isn't it?
Controversy aside, the enormous undertaking of Hook led to the initially budgeted 1-month shooting schedule to grow to over 2 months of shooting, and the initial $50 million budget to a staggering $100 million, or just over $400 million today. By the spring of 1991, filming was complete, and the countdown to the film's December premiere began. But while normally I save the discussion of cut scenes until the end, in this case, it's important to discuss it here.
I was the perfect man, but you did it for me.
Allegedly, the initial cut of Hook ran well over 3 hours, some say even 4. As between the setup of the story to the film's climax, there were a lot of scenes focused on expanding the characters. From fleshing out the Lost Boys, to scenes building on their reconnection to Peter, and Peter's own emotional journey discovering who he once was to them. There were also many scenes showcasing Captain Hook's ever-growing interest in Jack, essentially becoming the father he really wanted. This also showed just how manipulative Captain Hook could be, as he slowly turned them against the family and life he once had. Maggie's character also had scenes which expanded her presence in the film, in which she essentially becomes a very PBS figure for Captain Hook's captives. So while these scenes greatly fleshed out the second act of the movie, more than likely due to pacing, they were ultimately cut from the final film.
McDonald's Hook Happy Meal, based on a new movie. There's Peter Pan, a mermaid that swims, Hook himself, or a lost...
I remember those.
One with each
Holy hell.
hamburger Happy Meal you buy your kids.
When Hook was released in December of 1991,
was a good poster.
the movie opened at #1 at the box office and remained in that position for another 3 weeks. However, reviews for the Spielbergian blockbuster were mixed to very negative. Many criticized the film's slow pace, saying the only real thrills and heartfelt moments came after Peter Pan becomes Peter Pan, over an hour into the movie. Others felt the story simply lacked any real imagination and was an example of style over substance, with a poorly paced and uneventful second act. There were those who did see the film as a wonderful cinematic adventure. However, the overwhelmingly negative reviews drowned out those who sang praise for Spielberg's adaptation. But one thing everyone could agree upon were the incredible sets, thrilling musical score, visual effects, and the fantastic performances from Robin Williams and Dustin Hoffman. All told, Hook grossed just over $300 million worldwide, but with the film's $100 million budget, on top of the revenue percentages for Spielberg and the film's stars, the movie wound up with just a $40 to $50 million profit.
In Hook, a grown-up Peter Pan is able to fly again. They utilize the blue screen process with a mechanical flying rig and an elaborate...
That had to be super uncomfortable for for Robin Williams to do.
It did, however, receive 5 Academy Award nominations.
Yeah.
But with the stiff competition from the also effects-driven Terminator 2, Hook saw 0 wins. So despite early predictions that Hook,
which is unfortunate because they had some of the best set design ever.
Was seen as an expensive flop, an example of big budget spending with mediocre results.
I think it made back on movie or on home video though.
Big budget productions, but the White Knight of Hollywood spending actually wound up being Terminator 2. The also $100 million movie became the highest-grossing film of 1991, as well as the 3rd highest-grossing film of all time. However, Steven Spielberg wouldn't have to wait very long to reclaim his position as the king of the Hollywood blockbusters, as production soon began on a movie that would change cinema forever. Robin Williams wouldn't have to wait long either before giving life to one of the most iconic animated characters of all time.
I don't care what I am. I'm free. Offer void, we're prohibited by law.
In the years since, Spielberg has expressed his disappointment with the outcome of the movie, blaming himself for a lack of confidence in the second act. This is the reason I brought up the deleted scenes earlier, as I have to wonder if they could have helped audiences connect to the middle portion that so many deemed as uneventful and dull.
Let's have fun.
Okay. So there were a few small points in the middle of the movie where you're like, all substance, no, or all style, no substance. But I got this movie, I'm dating myself. I got this movie when I on VHS, and when I got this movie, it still is one of my favorite films of all time. I don't care what anybody else says. Dustin Hoffman and Robin Williams and Bob Hoskins and Julia Roberts, like all in one in an experience where you can forget, except for maybe Robin Williams, that those people are playing those characters. You can really like, oh well, I guess Julia Roberts is Tinkerbell, but still, I didn't mind her being Tinkerbell. It was cool. I didn't mind. It was good. It was a good movie. This was a really good movie. The Lost Boys are really cool.
Just made the second act feel bloated or just too unfocused, which is more than likely the reason.
Did you know that's where The Lost Boys, the vampire film, gets its name from? Because they're referencing The Lost Boys from Peter Pan. Mm-hmm. Not in universe lore, but just referencing, the group of Lost Boys. Yeah, whatever.
When they were cut in the first place. But then there's Maggie, who without those scenes expanding her character arc and essentially becoming Wendy, had very little purpose in the final film. However, since only 11 of the supposed 30 to 40 deleted scenes have seen the light of day, it's difficult to say for certain.
The film should have been a musical. It was my first impulse to make it into a musical, and I absolutely chickened out. at the last minute, and that was my mistake. It could have been a better movie as a musical.
Spielberg's other regret is not making Hook a musical as initially envisioned, which is interesting since the
I wouldn't have
song
liked it
that
as a
did make it
musical.
into the film was nominated
Yeah,
for
that
an
had
Academy
enough.
Award.
It had enough
Score was
music in it
not.
to where you
So
were
at the end of the
satisfied
day, if you're
with
like
the
me and
musical
love
part.
Steven Spielberg's Hook, despite its imperfections, here's to hoping that one day an extended cut is released, or at the very least the additional missing scenes, to see what truly could have been.
Yeah, I want the missing scenes. That would be cool. So that that ended fairly abruptly. Yesterworld Entertainment, ladies and gentlemen. Let's check his page out real quick. See what he. Oh yeah, he's got a lot of stuff. So check him out. Give him a like and a subscribe. There's a bunch of stuff here. All right. All right. Next up is the mind-blowing theming of Phantasialand by Poseidon Entertainment. I am subscribed already to this channel. That was weird.
Today I'd like to explore in a different direction, taking
Da Vinci's
a look
Cradle.
at Phantasialand. In the world of themed entertainment, Disney and Universal,
Well, at least in
continue to
Busch
dominate
Gardens,
the
that's what it's
cultural
called.
narrative, and obviously have had a lot to say about them. However, as a theme park fan, I would like to broaden the scope of the channel, exploring out beyond just these two mega giants, and really taking a look at other parks that offer exceptional experiences. In July of 2021, I produced a video exploring the attractions and theming of Efteling, a park located in the Netherlands. It's still one of my favorite videos that I've ever produced because of how fantastic that park is. It's definitely the top of my list for parks I want to visit outside of the United States. However, Phantasialand comes in at a close second, absolutely dripping with theming and full of attractions that look exceptional and should be enticing for anyone who's a fan of theme parks. Who builds not one, but two exceptional roller coasters that weave in and out of entire themed cityscapes? Something I've noticed with the theming of European parks is that they often have a strong sense of charm that their American counterparts lack. They just simply seem to care more about the guest experience, and so that's how we get such fantastic and unique attractions. With that being said, Phantasialand absolutely raises the bar of what we as parkgoers should expect from a themed experience, and so I'm quite excited to really dive into the park's offerings. Phantasialand opened in 1967 and is located in rural Germany. The park is
Oh, of course
small,
it's in
only taking
fucking
up
in
about
Europe.
69
Can't go to that park just now.
In comparison, Magic Kingdom takes up around 107, just to kind of give you a sense of scale. Because Phantasialand is so small, the park has frequently demolished old attractions and even entire lands in favor of building something new. Because of the large number of changes, chronicling the entire history of the park could be a video in and of itself. However, many of the past attractions once offered at the park don't necessarily reflect the point of this video, which is to highlight how well themed everything is. For example, Silvermine was a Western-themed dark ride that opened in 1984 and closed in 2014. While certainly interesting, Phantasialand's older dark rides seem to be rather weak, emulating many elements from other popular dark rides in the United States, but kind of missing the mark themselves. For example, Silvermine seemed to borrow heavily from the Calico Mine ride at Knott's Berry Farm, mixing it with a number of elements from Disneyland's Pirates of the Caribbean. The attraction is certainly interesting and an important part of Phantasialand's history, but it's not the best that the park has to offer. In fact, judging for what excites me about the park today, I would say that Fantasyland has never been better and only seems to be improving. A look back to Fantasyland's classic dark rides may be a potential video in the future, but here I'm going to be covering the park as it currently exists in 2022. As you enter the park, you are immediately immersed in an area simply called Berlin. Working as this park's version of Main Street, the architecture and atmosphere reflect Berlin in the early 20th century, full of shops and including a decent number of attractions. You'll also notice that the park is quite beautiful, and presents its flat rides in interesting ways that fit in really well with the theming of each land. For example, I feel that the double-decker carousel is made to be much more interesting within the theming of the Berlin streets. At the end of the street is a swing ride called Wave Flight, again made it just a bit more interesting by the inclusion of the surrounding theming, as well as the water features that play throughout the ride cycle.
That is pretty nice.
Another interesting attraction is a funhouse, with a name that roughly translates to the Crazy Hotel Tartuffe. Guests enter into the building and find themselves in an elevator that serves as a pre-show, where they encounter the hotel owner, Mr. Bockelstedt. He then welcomes the guests into his crazy and wacky hotel, which consists of a series of themed rooms that are full of tricky and disorienting funhouse elements. While funhouses are an interesting novelty of traveling carnivals, Fantasyland's decision to create an attraction like this still resonates well with me, because the surrounding environment definitely elevates it in a way I didn't think was possible. The last attraction located in Berlin is Mouse Chocolate, an interactive shooter dark ride very similar to Disney's Toy Story Mania. The premise is that you enter a cake factory that has been overrun by mice, and an exterminator named Oscar has enlisted your help to clear them out. However, the mice in the environment are not to be harmed, so you'll instead be using cake icing as your weapon to scare the mice away. As you ride through the attraction, a chocolate scent permeates the scenes as you work to scare away as many mice as possible in exchange for points. In my opinion, the gameplay for Toy Story Mania looks to be better than this, because it's simply more dynamic and has more variety in the targets that you can hit. However, Mouse Chocolate takes the immersion of the ride further by theming the areas between the gameplay portions. I'm not personally a fan of shooter dark rides, but this still seems like a charming attraction for a Main Street area of a park. Berlin really takes the idea of a Main Street further though, not only acting as shopping and dining, but is unique in offering some smaller attractions and putting an interesting twist on them. It's a good introduction for the rest of the park, which only becomes more interesting as you walk further into it. Before you walk to the end of Berlin, there is a self-contained area that can be explored if you turn left through one of the building facades. This new area called Rookburg
Go me, ladies and gentlemen.
2020, and
Behind me,
Tacoma's new
over
flying
my,
coaster
over
model,
this
which
shoulder.
has been aptly named Fly. It's a bit ambiguous as to whether Rookburg is considered an extension of Berlin,
Oh my gosh.
which very much seems to take place there, but now with a steampunk aesthetic. Regardless, it does act as a well-themed but self-contained area that offers a lot if explored. There is detail to be found throughout, and there are a few dining establishments as well. The area also incorporates one of the park's hotels, simply called Hotel Charles Lindbergh, named after the famous American aviator. The rooms can be a bit claustrophobic, but that's also part of the theming. They also allow visitors to get a direct look into Rookburg itself, with the coaster moving past many of the rooms. The hotel also features a themed bar area called Bar 1919 that serves cocktails inspired by the steampunk theming. As for Fly itself, it appears to be simulating the idea of strapping riders to a steampunk flying machine, and obviously sending them through the streets of Rookburg. Fly is the first launched flying coaster, actually featuring 2 throughout its course, and is also the longest flying coaster in the world at a length of 4,055 feet, or 1,236 kilometers. While the coaster appears to have inversions, the emphasis seems to be on how it moves through the environment and theming, which is the core of its experience. Obviously, it's a pretty cool coaster, would definitely be on anyone's list to ride.
Yeah.
Moving on from the front of the park, you can head to your left and into the next land, which is fantasy. This area circles around a beautiful lake with fantasy theming and includes a number of themed flat rides for children. In one corner, there resides a large building with what appears to be a mini-land called Blues Town. This section seems to represent a little fantasy town or village, with streets that wind in and out of the building and includes a number of flat rides as well. Most notable here are the two indoor coasters called Winja's Fear and Winja's Force. These two spinning coasters, manufactured by Mauer, interweave between each other and have unique track elements. For example, both coasters will start with a vertical lift that drops them into the course, where they spin around the atrium. Halfway through, though, both coasters will have a unique element. With Fear, the track will tilt forward, dropping the coaster car, and on Force, the track will flip to its side before releasing the vehicle.
Shit.
As one last surprise, both coasters feature a small drop track right before returning to the station. Other than these coasters, though, Blues Town is very much an area for kids. The flat rides seem to just be there to fill space, and the area offers little else other than an indoor coaster called Crazy Bats. Previously called Temple of the Nighthawk, it was renamed to Crazy Bats in 2019 and fitted with VR headsets, conveying a child-friendly story. By most accounts, the experience seems to just be okay, and the VR implementation tanks the capacity of the coaster. The other end of the fantasy section of the park seems to suffer from being underwhelming as well, because while it is well themed and beautiful, the area surrounding the lake is quite bare, with only some paddle boats and a splash battle being located in the middle. This part of the park isn't bad by any means, but its theming, or lack of it, really lies in contrast to what the rest of the park has to offer, which is far more exciting. If we move to the right of the Berlin Main Street, the first sign we will encounter is called Deep in Africa. This is the smallest land of the park, offering what appears to be only a few shops and eateries, but it does pack in a lot of theming. The land is also anchored by a B&M inverted coaster called Black Mamba, which weaves in and out of the trenches that the land is built around. As Fly, and now Black Mamba, have illustrated, Fantasia Land is limited with what it can build because of height restrictions. The way this coaster uses the terrain to instead provide a different and low-to-the-ground experience is something that will continue to define many of the park's coasters. It has a fair number of inversions, but the coaster also focuses a lot on near misses by really hugging the terrain. Deep in Africa is also connected to another of the park's hotels, simply called Hotel Matamba. As you can see, it's an extension of the Africa theming that looks out into the African section of the park. Moving on though, the next area is simply called Mexico. It definitely takes up a larger footprint of the park. Also really well themed, this area includes shops, dining, and 3 different attractions. The first one is a top spin called Talakan.
Again, this reminds me very much of Busch Gardens, Williamsburg, where they have the different countries, and Italy is really this reminds me of Italy, and here this ride in Italy at Busch Gardens is called Da Vinci's Cradle, and it has the same kind of thing.
Apparently, I would never get on one of these because the sensation that the ride vehicle produces seems like it would be unpleasant to me, but I might make an exception because of how well themed it is.
It's a fun ride.
As you can see, the ride cycle is synced with music, water, and pyro effects to achieve an elevated experience with what would otherwise just be a standard flat ride. Mexico also features a mine train roller coaster manufactured by Vekoma called Colorado Adventure. By all accounts, it seems to be a fun coaster. It was actually formerly known as Colorado Adventure, the Michael Jackson thrill ride, until 2013, because Jackson opened the coaster with a ceremony in 1996. It's a weird bit of misplaced synergy, but at least the coaster's current name makes sense with the 19th century Mexican theme. While the coaster looks fine, it's also outshined thematically by the various Big Thunder Mountains that Disney has built, and I think it will continue to suffer from those comparisons. It's definitely not a large draw to the park, but still appears to be a decent experience. Mexico's signature attraction, however, is an intimate flume ride called Chiapas. Weaving in and out of the land, this highly themed attraction first takes you up a lift hill through a quarry, right through the middle of Colorado Adventure. Entering a cave, you encounter an archaeological dig site and travel through Mayan ruins. Moving down a small drop, you find yourself back outside in a small but dramatic opening surrounded by waterfalls. As you enter another cave and encounter more Mayan architecture, the ride vehicle stops and the track switch flips right, sending riders backwards. This portion of the ride track is quite scenic, showing more evidence of the archaeological dig while traveling past more ruins built into the jungle cliffs. As far as I can tell, there doesn't seem to necessarily be a story for Chiapas, but the backwards portion does eventually bring riders into what is often described as the disco room. It features multicolored lights synced to music, laser effects, a disco ball, and an animatronic stone idol using skulls as a drum kit. It's unclear to me what this has to do with the ride thematically, but it's definitely interesting.
I mean, it's a dark ride coaster. I mean, you put whatever, especially if you're trying to make use of shit. Like you've got, like boss man's like, yo, we got to use these props. For what? I don't care. Just fucking put it somewhere. Put it in one of the roller. Just make it scare somebody. Oh, that's cool. And it switches tracks right there. That's cool.
This next portion is pretty lengthy but scenic, taking riders past more of the dig site and some outside Mayan ruins.
Yeah, I like water coasters like this. This is cool.
The logs then encounter another lift hill and then continue traveling through more rock work.
I wouldn't mind taking a vacation just to go here. I think that would be cool.
Being fed by various waterfalls, with riders now having returned to the Mexican town. Chiapas is certainly an interesting and well-themed flume ride, but I'm not sure if I completely understand it. It has some pretty interesting strengths, such as the novelty track switches or the strong sense of atmosphere, but I'm unsure if I'm missing some sort of narrative, especially because the inclusion of the disco room seems like a random element. Regardless though, Chiapas is certainly on my list of attractions I would like to experience. The second to last area of the park brings guests to a Chinese village with gardens, simply called Chinatown. A small but scenic area, it of course includes the themed shops and dining that you would expect elsewhere throughout the park. This area also includes Fantasyland's third hotel, simply called Hotel Ling Bao. The other two is also heavily themed for aesthetics of the land that it's attached to. Chinatown offers two attractions to visitors, guests first
so Shantae would probably want to stay here. I mean, I wouldn't mind either.
Understanding what was being conveyed here, and apparently,
but if I have a chance to live in a fucking castle, I wouldn't do that too. Not a Disney castle, a German castle, or an English castle, or a fucking Irish castle. You know, one of the castles made to defend.
A beautiful woman intending to marry her. A prince comes to battle the king, using the elements of earth, wind, fire, and water as his weapons.
They have their fortified castles in Asia too.
Where he loses, guests then board this madhouse style.
And quite a few cool ones. So, like,
Once
I don't know.
Once the ride cycle starts, it simulates the second battle with the environments moving around the guests. By most accounts that I can find, Fangju Palace seems to be a miss for the park, especially since the ride portion seems rather basic and lacks interesting effects.
I mean, that's cool though. Like, I like the rotating walls and all that stuff.
Animatronics
is hit or miss for me.
Which opened in 1981. Exploring the underworld and spirits of Chinese mythology, there are definitely some interesting ideas being portrayed here.
As long as it's relatable, I'd be interested. I like mythology in general.
Certain elements and scenes of Disney's Haunted Mansion, to its own detriment, I think. The content and premise of the attraction is inherently interesting, but I think what really fails is in its execution, with most scenes feeling a bit unimaginative.
There's either a creepypasta or an SCP article with those trees. Maybe not this exact one, but that's what it reminds me of.
I'm not going to go into the content of this particular attraction because it could probably fit into another video, along with attractions like Silvermine, exploring Phantasialand's dark ride phase through the 80s and 90s. I'm sure people would disagree with my assessment, especially native Germans who potentially grew up loving this attraction, but it's definitely a personal miss for me.
Got about another hour before I need to roll up out of here.
The last area of the park is simply called
I got a
Mystery,
long ass
taking on a
fucking
Nordic
day ahead of
medieval
me.
theme. Entering this area from Chinatown, one of the first attractions you'll encounter is River Quest, a rapids ride manufactured by Hafena. The attraction includes elevator lifts, which have lost a bit of their novelty as they've continued to become more common on these types of rides, but are still a welcome addition. The ride track is also well themed, being intertwined with or running through the medieval streets. Adjacent to River Quest, though, is the park's completely enclosed drop tower, simply called Mystery Castle. Walking through the queue, guests will encounter a gothic horror theme, and the park will oftentimes decide to station scare actors in there as well. The premise behind the attraction is that the owner of the castle made a deal with the devil, cursing subsequent generations of the family, with all of his sons dying by the age of 30. One of his youngest manages to break the curse, but in revenge, the evil spirits took the castle for themselves. In order to rid the castle of such evil, he creates a device to extract the positive energy of visitors, hoping to drive out the spirits. The ride portion was manufactured by Intimate. It works as the device being used to harness
that's
the energy
cool.
of the guests.
Man.
Rides are first launched, held at the top, and then go through a sequence of drops and launches, while a few of
Oh, come on. That's fucking cool as fuck, man. I mean,
pretty straightforward, but it's a fun twist on the drop tower concept. And I appreciate
I want to go here.
the story. As Rookburg is an extension of Berlin, but still its own separate area, so too is Klugheim an extension of Mystery. Arguably the main draw of the park, this area is defined by the medieval Nordic style, built on top of the salt mountains, with two roller coasters intertwined throughout.
Keep that over here.
The first of these is Rake, a family-style boomerang coaster manufactured by Vekoma. Despite the family audience, Rake is reported to still be an exciting experience, not just for the theming, but also because it provides decent forces and airtime. The coaster starts with a backwards lift hill, then dropping riders into the station through the ride course. Weaving in and out of the terrain, the coaster climbs another lift hill before dropping backwards, completing the course in reverse before returning to the station. The main draw of the area, though, will be Terran, an intimate multi-launch steel coaster. Coming out of the station, Terran first parks riders on the launch, before suddenly accelerating them to 80 kilometers or 50 miles an hour. As the train runs through the ride course, you'll notice that the track has no inversions, opting instead to focus on close calls by hugging the terrain and providing a lot of airtime for the riders. Eventually, the train will reach the second launch, sending riders up to 117 kilometers or 72 miles per hour in the second half.
Holy shit.
Being confined to such a small space, the track crosses itself 116 times and manages to be an ambitious experience despite the heightened space limitations of the park.
I'll be right back, guys.
Is a great
If it, okay. I'll be right back. 'Cause I don't want to miss this either, and we're almost done with this video. So I'll be right back. My coffee. let's finish this. I appreciate if you're still with me.
A new addition for the park, Klugheim and Terran were what put it on the radar for a lot of international tourists, and has definitely put the park
I may
on
get
my
another
list for
call.
top places I want to visit.
It depends.
It appears that Phantasialand is still in a major phase of transformation, though, working to appeal to a larger crowd outside of Germany. By removing many of its historic dark rides in favor of newer but still quality experiences with top-tier theming, the park has managed to capture the attention of more and more people. I've obviously decided to cover Phantasialand because it's a great park, and its attractions and theming interest me. There's a lot of things I really like about it, but there are also other aspects that really fall short. So, let's break down what the park does and doesn't do well. First, I'd like to talk about the flat rides. Whereas in most amusement parks, flat rides are generally just placed around to fill up space and increase park capacity a bit, Phantasialand manages to use them in interesting ways. For example, Mystery Castle works by taking the drop tower concept and enhancing it with heavy theming. While it still doesn't measure up to the greatness of Disney's Tower of Terror in its various iterations, Mystery Castle still manages to stand out with its theming, scare actors, and unique ride system. Telecan is also another excellent example of how to elevate a flat ride with theming and special effects. Even Waveflight, with its water effects and setting in the context of the heavily themed Berlin Main Street, manages to stand out. However, on the flip side, I do feel the park relies far too heavily on flat rides in other areas though. For example, Fengju Palace suffers from poor storytelling and a generally underwhelming ride experience. The fantasy section of the park, while often well themed and beautiful, manages to also rely a little too heavily on flat rides as well. I understand that the target demographic is small children, but this is an area I would like to see the park address more creatively with more family-oriented dark rides. So, the lesson here? Well, flat rides can be great additions to a theme park, but they really have to go beyond their capacity and thrill factors. By really committing to the theming, or treating them as kinetic draws to certain areas, Phantasialand stands as a great example of how to execute flat rides well. Another aspect I would like to speak about is theming. The really well-detailed areas are fantastic, especially in conjunction with the kinetic nature of the large attractions that exist within them. There's just something really cool about seeing Black Mamba roar through an African village. However, as you may have noticed, many areas of the park transition and blend poorly between the various lands. For example, this pathway allows you to see Mexico on your right, but with the lift hill and African theming of Black Mamba quite apparent in the distance. On the left side of the pathway, you can see Terran gliding around Klugheim. Obviously, the park is incredibly small, but these various lands didn't seem to be designed to be juxtaposed with one another. If it's something like Epcot's World Showcase, or the Central Lagoon of Islands of Adventure, the juxtaposition is done purposefully and effectively. However, it's clear here that it's an issue of space, but I still see potential easy fixes that the park chose to not go for. As an example, shielding the lift hill Black Mamba with more rockwork doesn't seem out of the question. A huge strength of this park is how immersive and beautiful the lands can be when you stand in certain areas, but that immersion is easily broken when you can see the clunky transitions between the lands. One last major aspect I would like to address is the storytelling. I've already commented on how Fengju Palace suffers from a muddled and poorly conveyed story, but this goes beyond just that. For example, while Terran and Fly may be excellent coasters surrounded by incredible theming, they do lack a narrative as far as I can determine. Extra context, even at a surface level, would elevate them even further. This is especially apparent with Chiapas, which doesn't really seem to make sense to me despite enjoying it for what it is. Why is there a disco scene inside a Mayan temple? Perhaps we'll never know. With that being said, additions like Mystery Castle and Masal Chocolate do seem to have a clear premise, so I do give the park credit there. In general, most of the criticisms I have with the park are a bit nitpicky, which should serve as a testament to its strengths. When the theme park narrative is often dominated by Disney and Universal, it's easy for smaller but still really well developed parks to be overshadowed. People love to talk about Splash Mountain, but what about the attraction that inspired it, the Timber Mountain Log Ride at Knott's Berry Farm? Why has such a strange but enchanting attraction like Arthur the Ride at Europa Park flown under a lot of people's radar? This is why I previously covered Efteling, because I was just fascinated by how dedicated that park was to quality attractions and atmosphere. Disney and Universal offer quite a lot, but parks like Fantasyland are emerging as worthy destinations that focus a lot more on original and creative ideas. Speaking from the perspective as a theme park fan from the United States, parks like this are often overshadowed by the corporate-driven IP synergy of Orlando and California, and so I've decided to expand the scope of the channel to include more overviews of parks like this. That's not to say that I still won't focus on Disney and Universal, but we're also missing a lot of exposure to other fantastic experiences that I would like to highlight occasionally. With all of this being said, if you enjoy the types of videos that I produce and want to help the channel out, I strongly recommend hitting the like button on the video. If you haven't already, I also encourage you to hit the subscribe button with the bell icon so as to be notified when new videos are released. Fairy tales are, without a doubt, one of the most popular themes that can be found in entertainment. For example, you can visit Rock City, a scenic mountain trail located in Lookout Mountain, Georgia. It's an attraction interesting enough to make an entire video on just itself, but to follow the theme of fantasy, there's a section of trail called Fairyland Caverns, which features blacklight dioramas depicting popular Western fairy tales. There's something about this type of fantasy that is immersive in an uncanny way.
Right.
Something that is at once magical and atmospheric, but could be unnerving to some. It's one of my favorite themes because of the strange feeling it can evoke, and Rock City is worth a visit if you're interested in this type of entertainment. Fairy tales have been pretty popular in the United States despite originating in Europe, and have also found themselves included in theme parks. For example, Busch Gardens Tampa has historically included a children's area called the Dwarf Village, featuring dioramas on popular fairy tales until 1995, when it was rethemed. While not following any particular story, the retheme To the Land of Dragons featured that same style of fantasy atmosphere and charm, with a few small rides included. Of course, it wouldn't make sense to discuss the popularity of European fairy tales in the United States without discussing Disney. I'm sure that a large reason these stories continue to have cultural relevancy is due to Disney's animated library, and I'm sure that Disneyland's Fantasyland played a large part in inspiring attractions.
Sorry, I'm a little bit distracted because I'm supposed to be waiting for a call from my boss and don't know if that's gonna. I don't know.
You'll understand the charm and atmosphere that these attractions evoke.
This day is very screwy, but
moving away from parks
I have to do what I have to do.
Instead, focusing on the ultimate fantasy park. A place with incredible but often bizarre and unnerving theming and experiences that is sure to intrigue any fan of themed entertainment. Join me today as we explore Efteling of the Netherlands and see how a dedication to themed experiences has resulted in some of the best attractions that the world has ever seen.
That's a nice title, by the way. Thank you very much, sir. You know, I need to go and one second, guys. I'm gonna put something on. Let's see what their one of their really good ones. Because, you know, I love fluff and entertainment and fantasy and horror and, you know, and as much just mindless television as anybody else. Well, maybe not mindless, but I like entertainment. But it's even better to be entertained and be informed at the same time. Works out for everyone. So, I have already seen this one, but it's an American incident, and it's kind of scary and interesting and frightening how determined one person can be to get to do something. So we're going to do this.
David Hahn, also known as the radioactive Boy Scout, built a nuclear reactor in his mom's backyard out of common household items when he was 17. As shocking as that is, that a teenager built a nuclear reactor at his mom's house, the story of what made it all possible and the terrible mess it created is even more insane. David was born just outside of Detroit, Michigan in 1976. His parents, who both worked for General Motors when they employed basically everyone in the area, unfortunately divorced when David was still very young. Growing up, he spent most of his time living at his dad and stepmom's house and lived on the weekends at his biological mom, Patty's house. When he was 10 years old, his grandfather, his stepmom's dad, gave David a seemingly harmless gift which would start this soon-to-be out-of-control chain of events in motion. The gift was a book called The Golden Book of Chemistry Experiments, and David was instantly obsessed. David set up a small laboratory in his bedroom at his father's house. But this wasn't like the pretend fun beakers full of water with food coloring in them type laboratory you might normally find in a kid's room. No, David bought legit beakers, Bunsen burners, test tubes, and lined his shelves with chemistry books and volumes of the encyclopedia. By 14, when most are messing around with relatively harmless experiments or making baking soda volcanoes, David had fabricated nitroglycerin. David was also in the Boy Scouts, and one time showed up to a Boy Scout camping trip with a bright orange face caused by an overdose of canthaxanthin, which he claimed he was taking to test methods for artificial tanning. He was literally performing experiments on himself when he was just a kid. On that same trip, David, along with some of his fellow scouts, blew a hole in one of their tents by igniting a stockpile of magnesium David had brought along to make fireworks. Despite the fact that David's father and stepmom were frequently alarmed by small explosions and chemical spills in their son's bedroom, they didn't put a stop to his experimentation. They just made him move his lab setup down to the basement as they were tired of him destroying his room, pockmarking the walls with various explosions and spilling chemicals all over the carpet. This is likely where all of this should have been put to a stop, but it wasn't. And David started heading down an even more dangerous path with his experiments. Banishing him to the basement was actually the opposite of punishing David. Now he just had more room and more privacy to conduct his experiments. He only became more obsessed and more focused on chemistry. He held down a variety of after-school jobs just so he could make money to buy materials to mess with in his laboratory. Soon, David would do something that would cause another change in location for his laboratory. He had gotten a hold of a bunch of red phosphorus, basically match heads, and he placed it in a glass container and started hammering it with a screwdriver. And yeah, it exploded. He injured his hands and arms badly, and he had to have glass, which exploded from the container, removed from his eyes. He had glass shards explode into his eyes, because of course, David wasn't wearing goggles. Again, this seems like the time any parent or guardian would take away the chemistry kit, but in this case, David just moved his lab to his biological mother's potting shed in her backyard, and that's where things started to get radioactive. David would spend countless hours in the shed doing God knows what, but both his mother and his mother's boyfriend never cared to check in on him. They were both just in awe of his work ethic and dedication. One day, David's mom's boyfriend, Michael, did ask him what he was up to, and David responded by saying, "You know, someday we're going to run out of oil." And here we go. David's dad thought that his son needed to take his obsessive work ethic and put it towards something useful, becoming an Eagle Scout. Eagle Scouts need to earn 21 merit badges across a variety of disciplines. Some are mandatory, but a few of them are Scouts' choice, as it were. You could earn a badge in business or woodworking, for example, But David went ahead and opted to earn a badge in atomic energy, which raised a red flag to absolutely no one, even though David was the only scout in the troop's history to go after that merit badge, and he had a history of blowing himself up. David put together an information pamphlet with the help of several utility companies to go towards earning his atomic energy badge. The general gist of the pamphlet was that nuclear energy was good, nuclear energy was vital, and nuclear energy needed to be studied more. He also made a chart explaining nuclear fission, and a harmless toy model nuclear reactor using a juice can, coat hangers, soda straws, kitchen matches, and a rubber band. David also had the opportunity to visit a hospital's radiology unit to learn how they use radioactive isotopes. And in the end, David was awarded his Atomic Energy Merit Badge on May 10, 1991, just a few months before his 15th birthday. Not content with his fake nuclear reactor he made out of soda cans and coat hangers, David decided he was going to build an actual radioactive nuclear power reactor in his mom's potting shed. And guess what? He did. But to do so, David would have to overcome some obstacles, and a few more adults would have to not ask any questions. David set out to build what's known as a breeder reactor, which is a specific type of nuclear reactor that not only generates power, it continuously creates new fuel for itself in an endless self-sustaining cycle. In theory, solving the world's energy problem. There were a few functioning large-scale breeder reactors built, but they were all either shut down for not actually producing cost-effective energy, or they had partial meltdowns. Before we get into the type of stuff David would have to acquire to build a breeder reactor, here's a very simplified explanation of the science behind it. All reactors rely on a bunch of a naturally radioactive element, typically uranium or plutonium, as the fuel for a sustained chain of reactions known as fission. Fission occurs when a neutron combines with the nucleus of a radioisotope, like uranium, and transforms it into a new, highly unstable form of uranium that immediately splits in half, creating a massive amount of energy, and causing a chain reaction of endless combining and splitting and the releasing of energy. Anyway, if that went over your head, don't worry about it. The point is, David would have to get his hands on a bunch of legitimately radioactive and extremely dangerous materials, which should basically be impossible, right? Nope, not really. Here's how he did it, and be warned, it will shake your faith in just about everything. Quite simply, David just pretended to be a college professor, writing letters and making phone calls to places like the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, the American Nuclear Society, the Edison Electric Institute, and the Atomic Industrial Forum. And then nobody decided to double-check David's made-up identity. Over the phone, a rep from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission ended up basically walking David through the entire process of obtaining and isolating radioactive isotopes. Normally, no one person would be able to legally obtain a large enough amount of the radioactive materials needed to pose any sort of danger. But this isn't a normal situation. This is David freaking Hahn. He was an Eagle Scout. David later said, "The NRC gave me all the information I needed. All I had to do was go out and get the materials." And he did. From his conversations with government officials and by looking over old Boy Scout booklets, David learned that you could find small amounts of radioactive elements in smoke detectors, old luminous clocks painted with a radioactive paint that made the numbers on the clock glow, and old camping lanterns. Just one of each of these items wouldn't cut it. David would need a large amount, more than any normal person would ever purchase to get what he needed. So, David just kept on pretending to be a professor and began his journey of procuring radioactive elements from these everyday items until he found something that
ladies and
succeeded
gentlemen,
in
this
creating fission. First, he called up a smoke detector
Life
company and
is-
said he needed 100 smoke detectors for a, quote,
Life is life.
school project. Not only did they agree to ship him 100 smoke detectors for a low price, they told him exactly where the radioactive material was located in the device, without ever getting confirmation of his identity or intentions. David received the smoke detectors, immediately obtained the radioactive material from all of them, which was Americium-241, by the way, welded it all together, and placed it inside of a lead casing with a small hole punctured in it, creating what is known as a neutron gun, the first step to achieving fission. Still, no adults have stepped in to stop this. From there,
That is
keeping in
so
line
crazy.
with David's obsessively focused work ethic, and
And this just goes to show you how lax people can fucking be when it comes to safety in issues like this. You know, especially back in the day when they're really, like, the paper trails really weren't, like, quick. You know what I'm saying? You couldn't just, like, oh shit, what the fuck? This dude has bought, like, all these. Ooh, we need to fucking go check into this. So I can see.
Keeping in line with the theme of no adults asking any questions or sounding any alarms whatsoever, David was able to extract thorium from thousands of old camping lanterns and get his hands on radium from old luminescent clocks, which he purchased from an antique store. All that along with some uranium he had ordered from Czechoslovakia over the phone, because why the hell wouldn't that be possible?
Yeah, really.
And some barium sulfate from the nurses at the local hospital's radiology ward, who just sort of gave it to him. David made a makeshift reactor core out of the highly radioactive radium and americium he had gotten from the smoke detectors and clocks. Then he surrounded this radioactive ball with a blanket composed of tiny foil-wrapped cubes of thorium ash, which he got from the old camping lanterns, and uranium powder, which were stacked in an alternating pattern with carbon cubes and tenuously held together with duct tape. Now he had a fully functional and unspeakably dangerous nuclear reactor in his mom's backyard, and no one had any idea. From there, since David was a teenager and really had no business doing any of this and wasn't exactly famous for his safety precautions in the past, the level of radioactivity from his reactor kept rising. It was already extremely hazardous, but David soon realized that he might be putting other people in danger. Soon, he was able to detect the radiation from his reactor 5 doors down from his mom's house. At this point, even David decided to dismantle the reactor and try to get all of that radioactive material he created to not be all concentrated in one place. So he did what the pros do and started to load it into the trunk of his Pontiac. At 2:40 a.m. on August 31st, 1994, the police were called by David's neighbors because they thought David was stealing tires from cars. He wasn't. He was simply loading a nuclear reactor into his own car. He told the cops he was just minding his own business, basically, but they didn't trust him. So they searched his car with the fair warning from David that it was, quote, radioactive. This is something the cops didn't like hearing, and they assumed David was in possession of an atomic bomb.
Why would you...
The bomb squad was called in.
Really? I mean... Really? An atomic bomb? I mean, he does have a nuclear reactor in his car, so technically they're not wrong. Technically.
And to the delight of everyone, they realized that David didn't have a homemade atomic bomb. However, they did measure 1,000 times the normal background radiation they should have been measuring, automatically triggering the Federal Radiological Emergency Response Plan.
Yep.
Finally, some adults were stepping in.
Finally.
Kind of. It took 2 months, 2 months, for anyone to take any real action. When he was initially arrested, David didn't say anything about his lab in his mom's shed, and nobody took a look. Then when they did take a look, 2 months after...
Really, Weird History is one of my favorite fucking channels. Like, if you want to learn and laugh and be creeped the fuck out by humanity, we don't need monsters, we have them in human form. We don't need anything else. We don't need boogeymen. We don't need ghosts. We don't need goblins. We don't need vampires. We don't need werewolves. We don't need any of that shit. We have them and have had them in human form.
David was arrested, the NRC didn't actually do anything about...
I'm not saying this kid's a monster. I'm just saying, like, we don't need really bad shit. We already have bad shit.
about cleaning up the shed because it was out of their jurisdiction since it wasn't a federally recognized nuclear site. It wasn't until January, 5 months after David was arrested, that the EPA showed up to David's potting shed lab. What they noted was David's lab, quote, presented an imminent and substantial endangerment to public health or welfare or the environment, and that there was actual or potential exposure to nearby human populations, animals, or the food chain. The memo further stated that conditions such as heavy wind, rain, or fire could cause the contaminants to migrate or be released. And also what they didn't know at that time, but what they came to learn later, is that during those 5 months of complete inaction, David's mom had thrown away a lot of what was in the shed into just the regular old household trash. If you're following, David's mom, unbeknownst to her, put highly radioactive materials, things that need to be cleaned up, handled, sealed, and buried by professionals, just into the bins, thereby spreading the radiation even farther, exposing more and more people. The EPA's cleanup took place in June. They dismantled the potting shed, sealed it up in bits, and buried it in a dump in the middle of the Great Salt Lake Desert, where it remains entombed alongside radioactive debris from governmental atomic bomb research and other radioactive industrial waste. According to the EPA's official assessment, David's nuclear reactor experiments exposed at least 40,000 people to extremely dangerous, cancer-causing levels of radiation. If there's any sort of lesson to be learned from this, it isn't you shouldn't let kids build nuclear reactors in the backyard. The lesson is rather sobering. And that lesson is that everyone is just kinda winging it. When presented with a case like David's, none of the grown-ups or government agencies you trust to keep you safe had any idea what to do. Everything is chaos. And we see it again and again right here in America in places like Flint, where the water is poisonous. Or just outside of St. Louis, where there is radioactive waste left over from the Manhattan Project in a landfill, causing unfathomable illness and death to local residents, and basically nothing has been done about it. In 1995, the EPA arranged for David to have a full examination to see just what kind of damage all of the radiation he exposed himself to had done, but David refused, fearful of what he might learn. David Hahn died in 2016 when he was 39 of alcohol poisoning, which is, of course, tragic. But the real tragedy here is that it seems like all of this could have been avoided if some adults just decided to pay attention.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to this channel for more of history's weirdness.
Already done, brother. Like, Weird History is by and far, like, it's one of my favorite channels. Absolutely. Yeah, I think I'm gonna cut it there because I've got things to do before I leave here, and I'll be back on tonight when I get home. I've got a couple more things to watch with you guys, and we'll do some gaming before I go to bed tonight. Yeah. So I'll see you guys later. I am Josh with American Gnome Productions, and stay happy, stay safe, stay healthy. I'll see you in the next one. I love you guys. Oh, like, subscribe, and share on my YouTube as well, and tell your friends, especially the stoners. I've got lots of good stuff for the stoners.